Most women think men fall in love the same way they do, gradually, emotionally, through deep conversations and vulnerable moments. And honestly, that belief is costing a lot of good women real love. Here's what nobody is telling you: men don't fall in love the way romance movies suggest. They don't sit across from you at dinner and suddenly feel a wave of emotion hit them. It doesn't work like that. And when women keep expecting it to work like that, they either push the wrong men away or hold on way too long to men who were never going to love them at all. What actually happens inside a man's mind when he falls in love, I mean really falls, not just gets attached or stays out of habit, is one of the most misunderstood topics in all of modern dating. And today, we're going to break it down. All of it. No sugarcoating, no oversimplification, just real psychology, real insight, and real takeaways you can actually use. All right, let's get into it. Here's the thing people get completely wrong about this topic. They confuse attraction with love. They confuse attachment with love. They confuse a man staying with love. And those are not the same things, not even close. A man can be wildly attracted to a woman and never love her. A man can be deeply attached to a woman, texting her every day, spending every weekend with her, introducing her to his friends, and still not be in love with her. And a man can stay in a relationship for years, comfortably and consistently, without ever truly falling in love. I know that's hard to hear, but understanding that distinction is everything. Because once you understand it, you stop measuring love by the wrong things. See, most dating advice out there focuses on getting a man's attention, how to dress, what to text, how to seem mysterious, when to respond. And look, some of that matters in the early stages, but it has almost nothing to do with making a man fall in love. Attention and love are two completely different currencies. Attention is cheap, love is rare. What we're talking about today is the psychology behind that rarer thing. The internal process that actually leads a man to look at a woman and feel something he hasn't felt before. Something that makes him think, this is different. I don't want to lose her. That's what we're unpacking from multiple angles, because it doesn't happen through one thing. It happens through a series of psychological conditions being met, usually without either person fully realizing it. So let me break this down for you. The first thing you need to understand is that for most men, love begins with respect, not romance. I know that sounds unromantic. I know every love song ever written says otherwise, but I'm telling you, this is one of the most fundamental truths about male psychology, and most women have never been told this clearly. Think about it like this. Imagine you're hiring for the most important position in your company. You meet two candidates. One is charming, exciting, and makes every meeting feel electric, but they're inconsistent, unreliable, and you can never quite pin down what they stand for. The other candidate, they're solid, they're clear, they know what they bring to the table, they don't back down from challenges, and when they say they'll do something, it gets done. Which one earns your respect? Which one do you actually want to invest in for the long haul? Men experience romantic interest in a similar way, especially when it comes to love. Early attraction might be sparked by beauty, chemistry, playfulness, all of that. But love? Love gets built on respect. And respect for a man comes from seeing a woman who knows who she is. I was talking to a man recently, mid-30s, successful, told me he dated several beautiful women, but had only ever truly been in love once. I asked him what was different about her. Without hesitating, he said, she had standards. She had a direction. She wasn't performing for anyone, not even for me. He said he could feel that she liked him, but she wasn't going to compromise herself to keep him. And that, he told me, made him want to keep her more than anything else. That's not just one man's story. That pattern comes up over and over again. Men fall in love with women who have self-respect, not arrogance, not coldness, not playing games. Genuine, quiet, non-negotiable self-respect. Because a woman who respects herself signals to a man that she is worth respecting. And once a man genuinely respects a woman, the door to love swings wide open. Now, here's the counterintuitive part. Many women trying so hard to be lovable actually undermine this. They over-accommodate. They shrink their opinions. They ignore their own needs to avoid conflict. And men notice that. It might feel comfortable in the short term, but it quietly lowers the level of respect he holds for her. And with that goes the foundation for real love. The practical takeaway here is this. Before you ask yourself whether he loves you, ask yourself whether he respects you. And before you ask yourself whether he respects you, ask yourself whether you've given him reasons to. Not by being perfect, by being real, by having a point of view, by being someone who stands for something. All right, here's where it gets interesting, because this one challenges one of the most common pieces of advice that women get about men, which is that men are afraid of commitment. You hear this all the time. Men just don't want to commit. Men are emotionally unavailable by nature. And I want to challenge that because it's not quite true. What men are actually afraid of is not commitment, it's vulnerability. And that fear comes from somewhere real. Here's the thing most people don't think about. Men are raised from a very young age to suppress emotional expression. Boys are told directly and indirectly to toughen up, not to cry, to handle things on their own. That conditioning doesn't disappear when they grow up and start dating. It gets carried into every romantic relationship they've ever had. So by the time a man is in his 20s or 30s, he's been trained for decades to keep his emotional world private. And love, real love, requires a man to crack that door open, to be seen, to be known. And that is genuinely terrifying for a lot of men. Not because they're broken, but because they've been taught that emotional exposure equals weakness. Think about it like this. Imagine you've been training for years in a contact sport. You wear your protective gear every single time you step onto the field because you've been hit before and you know what it costs when you're not protected. Now someone asks you to take off all your gear and play the most important game of your life. You might trust the sport. You might love the sport, but you're going to need to feel really safe before you take off that gear. That's what emotional intimacy asks of a man. It asks him to take off the gear. And he will only do that when he feels genuinely safe. Safe from judgment, safe from ridicule, safe from rejection. This is why the energy a woman creates matters so much. Not the words she says, the energy. When a man talks about something he cares about and a woman listens without minimizing it, without teasing him for it, without using it against him later, he remembers that. When a man admits he's struggling and a woman doesn't panic, doesn't project, doesn't immediately try to fix him, he feels that. And slowly, carefully, he starts to open. I'll give you an analogy. A thermostat doesn't just respond to temperature once. It's constantly sensing, constantly adjusting. Men in relationships are doing the same thing emotionally, constantly, often unconsciously, sensing whether it's safe to be vulnerable. And every interaction either turns the temperature up or down on that safety. Now, here's the part most people miss. This doesn't mean women need to walk on eggshells. It doesn't mean suppressing your own emotions to make room for his. It means creating an environment of mutual emotional safety. When both people feel like they can be real without being punished for it, that's when love doesn't just show up, it takes root. The practical takeaway: if you want a man to fall in love with you, pay attention to how you respond when he's vulnerable. Not just in the big moments, in the small ones. The way you respond when he shares a small fear, a small disappointment, a small joy, those micro moments are building a case inside his mind for whether you're the person he can be his full self with. And that's who men fall in love with. Not the most beautiful woman, not the most agreeable woman. The woman who makes them feel safe enough to be real. Now listen, I want to talk about something that has been wildly misrepresented in the dating advice space. And that's the concept of challenge. Because you've probably heard it: play hard to get, don't text back too fast, make him chase you. And while there's a kernel of truth buried somewhere in there, the way it's usually taught is manipulative, shallow, and ultimately self-defeating. Here's the real psychology behind it. Men are wired, evolutionarily, psychologically, to value what they've worked for. This isn't a character flaw. It's not even unique to men. It's a universal psychological principle. Humans tend to assign more value to things they've invested in. Psychologists call it the effort heuristic. The harder something is to attain, the more we assume it's worth having. Think about any domain where this is true. In fitness, the body you had to discipline yourself to build means more to you than one you were handed. In business, the client you had to pitch 5 times, refine your offer for, and genuinely earn, that relationship means more than the one who signed up without a second thought. In sports, the championship that came after years of grinding is incomparably sweeter than the one that fell into your lap. Love works the same way for men. Not because men enjoy suffering or like to chase for the sake of chasing. That's the shallow version of this truth. The deeper version is this: men fall in love with women who represent a genuine emotional investment. An investment requires some level of uncertainty. Let me tell you something. The moment a man feels completely certain that a woman will always be there, regardless of how he shows up, regardless of how much he invests, regardless of who he is, something switches off. It's not that he stops liking her. It's that the pursuit mechanism, the part of his brain that says, I need to earn this, I need to keep showing up, goes quiet. And when that goes quiet, love has no fuel to run on. Now, here's where people get it wrong. They hear this and they think, so I need to be unavailable, play games, be cold, make him wonder. No, that's not challenge, that's confusion. And confusion doesn't create love, it creates anxiety. And anxious attachment is not love. Real challenge isn't artificial unavailability. Real challenge is a woman who has a full, meaningful life of her own. It's a woman who has real standards and actually enforces them calmly and without drama. It's a woman who isn't performing for his approval, which means she doesn't collapse when she doesn't get it. That is genuinely challenging in the most attractive sense of the word, not because she's hard to reach, but because she's fully herself. And that self is worth pursuing. I was talking to someone recently who said she deliberately stopped texting a guy back quickly, stopped being available, made herself seem mysterious, and he came back for a while. But then she said, once they actually got into a relationship, he stopped making effort almost immediately. Why? Because the challenge was artificial. There was no real substance behind it. The moment the game ended, the investment dried up. Contrast that with a woman who is genuinely pursuing her goals, genuinely happy in her own life, genuinely unbothered by whether or not he texts back in 20 minutes. That's not a performance. That's real. And men can feel the difference. That real version keeps him invested not just in the beginning, but long after the honeymoon stage is gone. The takeaway here is this: don't manufacture challenge. Build a life that is genuinely worth pursuing. Be someone who has real things going on, interests, ambitions, friendships, growth, so that being with you feels like something to rise to, not just something to settle into. Here's a truth that explains a lot of the disconnect between men and women in relationships. Women tend to bond through conversation, through sharing feelings, thoughts, fears, and dreams. For many women, talking about the relationship is part of the relationship. It's how intimacy gets built. And that's completely valid. But here's what most people don't understand. Men bond primarily through shared experience, not through talking about the experience, through having it, side by side, together. Think about male friendships. Men who've been best friends for 20 years often don't sit across from each other and say, I just want you to know you mean a lot to me. I appreciate our connection. They go to a game together. They take a road trip. They start a business together. They go through something hard together. And through those shared experiences, a bond gets formed that doesn't need words to be real. Romantic love for men works in a similar way. A man builds emotional connection to a woman through what he does with her, not primarily through what he says to her. The conversation they had until 3 a.m. matters, but it matters in the context of being there together, in that specific moment, in that shared space. The experience is the vehicle for the emotion. This is why activities matter so much in early dating, not because they're distractions, but because they're the medium through which men actually feel close to you. The trip you took together, the challenge you faced together, the inside joke you developed, the thing you both laughed about in a moment nobody else was part of. Those experiences are what his emotional memory is built on. I want you to think about it like compound interest. A man might spend an hour in a deep conversation with a woman and feel moved by it. But 10 hours of shared experiences, laughter, adventure, difficulty, playfulness, that builds a compound emotional investment that's much harder to walk away from. Not because he's shallow, but because that's how his emotional architecture works. Now, here's the insight most women miss. When a man says he needs more time before he can say, I love you, it often isn't that he doesn't have feelings. It's that he hasn't had enough shared experiences yet for those feelings to crystallize into something he can name. He might be waiting for more evidence from real life, more moments, more proof that what he feels is real and not just chemistry. This is why trying to rush love through intense conversations alone often backfires. I've seen women push hard for emotional depth in conversation. What are we? Where is this going? What do you feel? before there's been enough shared experience for him to even have a solid answer. And the man shuts down. Not because he doesn't care, but because he's being asked to report on feelings that haven't fully formed yet. The practical takeaway: invest in the shared life, not just the shared conversation. Suggest doing things together, new things, interesting things, sometimes difficult things. The emotional bond that forms around shared experience is often more durable and more real than anything built through words alone. Don't underestimate a moment of shared laughter, shared adventure, or shared challenge. That is often where real love gets quietly built. All right, now we get to what I think is the most important point of this entire video, and the one that most people have never thought about clearly. And it's this: a man doesn't fall in love in a single moment. But there is a moment, a specific internal turning point where something shifts, where he goes from enjoying you to not being able to imagine his life without you. And that turning point is almost always connected to one thing: he starts seeing you in his future. Now, I want to be very clear about what I mean, because this is subtle. I'm not talking about him consciously deciding, okay, she's the one, I'm going to commit. Men rarely experience love like a logical decision. What actually happens is more like this: he starts noticing that when he imagines something good happening in his life, a promotion, a trip, a quiet Sunday morning, you're in the image. He doesn't choose to put you there. You just start appearing there. And when that starts happening, it means something has shifted at a deeper level than he may even be aware of. Think about it like this. Have you ever bought something, a piece of furniture, a car, a pair of shoes, and before you even owned it, you were already picturing it in your life? You were imagining how it would feel to use it, where it would go, how your days would change. Psychologists call this mental simulation, and it's one of the most powerful predictors of desire and commitment in human decision making. Once we can picture something clearly in our future, we start to want it more, not less. Love for men works in a parallel way. When a man starts mentally simulating a future that includes you, not because he was told to, not because it makes logical sense, but because your presence has woven itself naturally into how he sees his life going forward, that is when he is falling. That is when love is happening, even if he hasn't said the words yet. Now, what causes that to happen? What makes a woman start showing up in a man's mental vision of the future? A few things, and they're interconnected. First, she has to represent something he values in his own life, not just in terms of attraction, but in terms of identity. A man falls in love with a woman who fits into the life he's building, and more importantly, into the person he's becoming. If you challenge him to grow, if being around you makes him feel like a better version of himself, he starts to associate you with his best life. And once that association is made, pulling away from you feels like pulling away from that best life. Second, she has to feel genuinely irreplaceable. Not because she's tried to make herself that way through jealousy tactics or dependency, but because she genuinely brings something unique that he hasn't found anywhere else. Maybe it's the way she thinks. Maybe it's the way she makes him feel seen. Maybe it's the specific combination of qualities that only she has. Whatever it is, when a man feels that, he doesn't want to risk losing it. And that risk aversion around losing you is often what crystallizes from "I like her a lot" into I love her. I was talking to someone once who described the moment he knew he was in love with his partner. He said he'd been on a trip with some friends, having a genuinely great time, and in the middle of a really fun moment, his first thought was, I wish she was here. Not because he was unhappy, not because he needed her, but because the best moments in his life had started to feel incomplete without her in them. That's love. That quiet, involuntary inclusion of someone in every corner of your life. That's where it lives. The practical takeaway is this. Don't just focus on being a great person to be with in the present. Think about whether you represent something important to him in terms of where he's going. Show up for his dreams, not just his moods. Be present in the direction of his life, not just the day-to-day comfort of it. Because when a man starts seeing you as part of where he's headed, not just where he is, that's when falling in love goes from possible to almost inevitable. Before I wrap this up, I want to give you one final insight. And this one is important because it reframes everything we've talked about today. And it's this. A man can meet an incredible woman, a woman who checks every box psychologically, emotionally, practically, and still not fall in love with her. Not because of anything she did wrong, but because he wasn't ready. I know that sounds like an excuse. I know it's been used as an excuse by men who just didn't want to commit. But hear me out, because there's a real and important truth here. Men have a readiness window for love. And that window is influenced by where they are in their own psychological development, their sense of identity, their goals, their relationship with themselves. A man who hasn't yet figured out who he is or what he wants in life is going to be a fundamentally limited romantic partner, regardless of how perfect the woman in front of him is. Not because he doesn't feel something, he might feel a lot. But love requires a certain groundedness, a certain emotional availability that a man can't fake his way into. Think about it like trying to plant a tree in soil that isn't ready. The seed might be excellent. The gardener might be doing everything right. But if the soil isn't prepared, if it's too rocky, too dry, too shallow, the tree just won't take root. The conditions have to be right on both sides. This is why it's worth paying attention early on to a man's relationship with himself, not just his relationship with you. Is he growing? Is he pursuing something? Is he emotionally honest with himself? A man who is doing the work of becoming is a man who has the emotional resources to actually fall in love. A man who is stuck, disconnected, or running from himself will always hit a ceiling no matter how amazing you are. This isn't about lowering your standards. It's about directing your energy toward men who have the internal capacity for the depth of love you're looking for. So let's bring this all together. Men fall in love, real love, not just attachment, not just attraction, not just habit, when a series of psychological conditions are met. When they respect a woman who respects herself. When they feel emotionally safe enough to be vulnerable. When there's real challenge rooted in a real life. When shared experiences build genuine emotional investment. And when a woman starts appearing in the vision a man holds for his best life. Think about that and ask yourself, honestly, whether you're building the version of yourself that would make even you fall in love with you. If this video gave you something real today, hit the like button. It genuinely helps get this content to people who need it. And if you're not subscribed to the Psychology of Love yet, do that right now because we go deep here every single time. I'll see you in the next one.